At first, I was going to post this in a relationship advice subreddit, but as it started getting stranger, I realized it makes more sense here. So, every morning, my husband would wake up early and cook breakfast for us and our two kids. It is usually eggs and bacon with some toast or biscuits or pancakes. We recently moved into a new 3-bedroom apartment in a much older part of the city, with this beautiful dark wood furniture already in it. Well, ever since, my husband seemed to have picked up a strange habit. He's always been a bit lazy with cleaning up after cooking, so I'd always have to take the used eggshells out of the carton and throw them away for him. After we moved into the new place, I was proud of him. There'd never be eggshells in the carton, so I assumed he'd taken a chance amid all the chaos to fix a few of his bad habits. Well, cue one random Tuesday morning. It was a work holiday at my office, but everyone else was out of the house. I decided to sweep and dust the place thoroughly, which we hadn't done since we'd moved in a month or so prior. Found a lot of dust bunnies, and some coins and knickknacks, but by far the strangest thing I found was when I got to the wardrobe in our bedroom. It stood about 4 inches off the ground, on hand-carved clawed feet. When I peered under it, there was a lot of dust and spiderwebs, but behind it were eggshells. Admittedly, I jumped a little when I first saw them, but I pretty quickly realized they were just regular eggshells, maybe 7 or 8. I swept them out from under the wardrobe and threw them away. I figured they were from the previous owner, though I was thoroughly confused by why they'd be there, of all places. I cleaned again the next weekend. This time I found eggshells under the couch. Pale, white, slightly bigger, and slightly slimy. They must have been recent. That, and the fact I'd cleaned under the couch last time ruled out the previous tenants as the source of the shells. I still wasn't sure if I wanted to bring it up with my husband. It seemed too strange of a thing to do intentionally, so I racked my brain for other explanations. Maybe they got knocked under there unintentionally, but how would that happen half a dozen times? Maybe they got dragged under there by an animal, but we didn't have pets, and no issues with rodents or other critters. Maybe one of our kids fished them out of the trash and put them there, but Zoe was too young to get into the trash can. And Nick could have done it. He was 7, but I still couldn't think of a motive. Over the following weeks, this happened several more times. Once it was in a dusty corner of the pantry, but both other times it was the wardrobe again. I started getting increasingly curious, almost disturbed by the occurrences. It was a part of my morning routine, before anyone else got up, to check under every piece of furniture and in the corner of every closet and pantry with a little penlight, to check for shells from the previous morning without being interrupted. It had gotten more frequent. Pretty much every day I was finding eggshells, almost always under the wardrobe, nestled near the baseboard of the wall, not too far from the radiator. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to just watch my husband as he threw away the eggshells from breakfast. Since now that we'd moved across the city, my commute was twice as long, and I'd had to leave before breakfast was ready. Finally, I decided to just confront him about it, since it was increasingly bothering me. Was this some sort of prank? A strange compulsion? Just his way of getting back at me for always complaining about the eggshells? Surely he knew that I knew, since I'd been cleaning them up every morning from under the wardrobe. When he got home from his job one day, I gave him some time to relax, then strode into the bedroom with him and shut the door. "We need to talk about the eggshells." He gave a little smile and looked up at me. "So you noticed?" Of course I noticed. I described to him my annoyance and how after the first few times I didn't really find it funny that he left raw eggshells all over the house. I told him to knock it off and stop with the wardrobe thing. Under the wardrobe? Came his confused reply. I finally took the time to start throwing away my eggshells since I knew it had always bothered you when I left them in the tray. That's what I was talking about. What on earth are you talking about? I was speechless. So, you haven't been leaving eggshells all over the house? Almost every morning I've been finding them. Under the wardrobe mostly, but I found them in closets, in the pantry, in my bookshelf, in laundry piles. Hell, even under the blankets of our bed. If this is some sort of prank, you've definitely gotten me good. His look of confusion was amplified. Who do you think? Could Nick be doing it? Or is this some sort of prank on me? It can't be Nick. He's too squeamish around raw eggs. I tried testing the waters to see if it was him. He wouldn't even bring me an uncracked egg when I was baking cupcakes. Nick had always been a germaphobe, so his unwillingness to touch raw eggs didn't strike me as an act. Are there any shells under there from this morning? I had never considered checking under the wardrobe in the evenings, so I did. I dropped to my knees and peered under it, and nothing. What about the other places? Intrigued, I grabbed my penlight. I'd been finding something every morning for the last week, so if there were any shells, I was sure I'd find them. I checked all the usual places and found nothing. I checked the kids' beds, the kitchen cabinets, under the fridge, and still not a sign of eggshells. They must be being moved there overnight, I said, puzzled. I had never connected this to the eggshells, but I started noticing this odd skittering noise in the middle of the night. I would awaken, usually between midnight and 2 a.m., to a strange clicking, like claws on the hardwood floor. It would go away after a second, so I assumed it was the house settling, or maybe a ceiling fan downstairs rattling the floorboards. Rodents had been an early thought of mine, but a call to the previous tenants and a knock at my neighbors' doors confirmed nobody had ever had issues with mice, and we'd never noticed food going missing, holes being gnawed, or droppings. I couldn't understand why mice would move eggshells around, but it was the most likely explanation I had, so I put out some humane cage traps with lures. One night, I woke up and heard the skittering again. This time, I grabbed my penlight and walked out into the kitchen. I shone it around, but the skittering faded off and stopped. On the way back to bed, on a whim, I peered under the wardrobe. At first I thought I saw the shells again, but then I realized I was mistaken. They were uncracked, whole eggs. My curiosity turned to shock, then to revulsion as I realized they weren't ordinary eggs. They were larger, more rounded, slightly moist, and slightly translucent. It took all of my self-control to not scream in horror, but I jumped and slammed my head into a shelf in the wardrobe. I woke up my husband, who came to his senses instantly, jumped out of bed, and asked if I was okay. I held onto the part of my head that I'd hit, wincing in pain, but I managed to gesture under the wardrobe with the penlight. After looking at my head to make sure it wasn't bleeding, he cautiously peered under the wardrobe with the flashlight. "Oh my God," I heard him say. We whispered for a few minutes, unsure what to do. We couldn't think of any animal that laid eggs like that. We knew we needed to get rid of them, but didn't know where to put them or how to pick them up. I shuddered to think of all the times I'd touched those shells with my bare hands. My skin crawled as I realized whatever was hatching from those had done so possibly hundreds of times under that wardrobe. We settled on using a dinner plate and a spatula to gather up the eggs, and walked them downstairs and dumped them in the dewy grass. My husband had suggested throwing them off the balcony, but I didn't like the idea of killing whatever was growing in those eggs, despite not knowing what it was. What if they were something cute? The next night was by far the most horrifying night of my life. I'm going to warn you up front. You might want to just stop here if you've experienced something similar long ago in your life, because you'd rather not know what it actually was. But here goes nothing. It felt a bit on edge ever since last night. I'd struggled to sleep at all, so I grabbed a nice coffee from the fridge and pulled an all-nighter writing in my journal about what had been happening and how my life was going. As the sun rose, I started feeling a little silly and figured the eggs were something innocuous, though I still didn't have the slightest clue what. I went to work, albeit with a bad headache, and everything seemed fine. I didn't bring up the eggs with my coworkers, since they would probably think I was going crazy, or be grossed out and suggest something drastic, like fire. Maybe I should have considered that route. That night, I checked the house for eggs, then went to sleep, and was awoken by the usual skittering. This time, though, is followed up by a muffled metallic clang, and much more violent skittering. My heart skipped a beat. The trap must have caught some sort of animal in the house. I considered rousing my husband, but I figured I'd be brave. I took the pen light and peered cautiously around the door. The island counter blocked my view of the trap. As I carefully circumnavigated the counter, I caught a glimpse of the trap and screamed. It held a spider-like gray, hairy creature about the size of a rat, or a small dinner plate if you counted its legs. I dropped the light in shock, and it broke, engulfing the room in darkness. I heard more skittering behind me, and a hiss from the monster in the trap. My eyes were still adjusting to the darkness, but I could see movement out of the corner of my eye. I squared off with one of the creatures, which had its legs bent, as if it was about to leap straight at me. Looking around frantically, I realized my only remaining option: up. I grabbed the cord to the attic door and pulled. Something soft and light fell on my head and rolled off my back, but I grabbed the ladder and yanked it down, never taking my eyes off the spider thing, its eyes glowing in the faint moonlight. I scrambled up the ladder to the attic, and the last thing I remember is seeing hundreds, maybe thousands, of tiny pinpricks of light, blinking. I know I'm going to sound insane to you, but what has been happening to me has freaked me out for many years. For context, I live in the mountains. The little town that I lived in used to have a road going through it, and a forest on the other side. We used to get a lot of visitors around autumn because of how pretty our little town looked. Autumn was where we got a lot of money for hotels and restaurants. Many townsfolk anticipate autumn, but something sinister also comes with this season that affects our little town. The Leopard Man. Some people call him the Furry Man or Fuzzy Man. Some people call him the Polka Dot Lion, but the most popular name is the Leopard Man. Every autumn, he comes through our town and just stares. He doesn't go in any of the houses, doesn't talk to anyone. Some of the townspeople have said that they've gotten real close to him and can see that his eyes are bloodshot red. He breathes heavily and has the odor of death stuck to him. Many townsfolk find him very unsightly and try to keep the talk of him low so no tourists can hear about him and keep the economy stable. But every year, he comes down the road, walks through the town, and leaves into the forest. I always thought he was harmless, until I had my first and final interaction with him. I was about 6, and to be honest, wasn't very helpful to either of my parents. I loved to play outside, and when I couldn't, threw a huge temper tantrum. I usually played in the front yard with my favorite soccer ball. I absolutely loved that thing. But one day, I accidentally kicked it into the forest. I didn't mean to, and I went to ask my parents if I could go get it. They said no, and I suggested that me and either my dad or mom could go walk into the other side of the street and into the forest to get it. But they still said no. I was incredibly sad. I cried my eyes out all day. I was a mess when I went to bed. I was still super sad. I couldn't go to sleep. Kept thinking about that, just staring through my window, hoping I could sneak out before my parents could catch me. But then he came and stared through the window. The Leopard Man is a danger and shouldn't be messed with. I freaked out and ran to the corner of the room, trying to shield my eyes from him. He gestured that I should open the window, but I was too scared. But then, the Leopard Man held something. My soccer ball. It was deflated, but I didn't care. The Leopard Man had it and I wanted it back. He gestured again that I should open the window, and this time I did. I cracked it just a little bit. I was still very scared of him, and smelt his foul odor. "Well, well, well, I believe this is yours," said the Leopard Man, holding up the deflated soccer ball. "Yes, that's mine. How did you find it?" I said, prying the window just a little bit more. "Well, I've been observing you, and I know just how deeply you care about that ball. And when you kicked it into the forest and couldn't get it back, I felt so sad for you. So, I trekked through the forest and found it. Now, I'm giving it back to you." "It's ruined. It has a massive hole in it. I can't play with it anymore," I said, looking disappointed. "Ah, don't be sad. Here, if you come out of the house, me and you can trek to my fixie-uppity house, and we can get it fixed in no time." I thought about it, but shook my head. "But you're a stranger. I don't even know who you are, and how do you know where I live?" "Well, I work with the Tooth Fairies, and together we know all the names of the boys and girls around the globe. I know your name's William, and I know who your mommy and daddy are. Would I really be a stranger if I knew what your name was?" I thought about it. It's true. Strangers don't know the names of small boys and girls and who their parents were. "I guess not," I said. "See, I'm not a stranger. I'm your friend, and friends help each other. And that's what I'm trying to do with you. So, if you crawl out the window, me and you can meet all my friends and the fairies living in the forest together," said the Leopard Man. I was hooked. I wanted to meet all his friends, and I also wanted to get my soccer ball back. So I pried the window and crawled through it. One thing that I didn't notice was that the Leopard Man was large. He had to be less tall than my dad averaging about 6'2" in height, and he squeezed my hand so hard that I was afraid he was going to break it. As we walked, I could tell that he was breathing very hard, and all he talked about was he couldn't wait for me to see his friends at the house. We walked for about a mile through the forest until we came through a clearing and I saw the house. It looked like it had been abandoned for years. The roof was caving in, the windows were broken, and all you could see was darkness. "Is this your house?" I asked. "Yes, doesn't it look so fun?" said the leopard. I didn't think so. I want to go home. This is scary," I said, trying to yank my hand from the man. No, 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 you're not going anywhere now. This is your home forever. and you're going to meet all my wonderful friends," the Leopard Man said. He pulled me into the house, and I smelled something very putrid. I tried to cover my mouth and nose from the smell, and I was trying very hard not to cry. Inside the house was much better from the outside appearance. The floors and walls were decaying. The man led me to the basement. The smell became absolutely horrible. The man gripped onto my hand even tighter. I kept telling him that he was hurting my hand, but he just kept walking down the stairs and breathing hard. When we got to the bottom, all my eyes could make out was their shelves lining the wall with round things on them. The Leopard Man told me to sit, and he went to turn on the basement light. As he did, he said, "I'm so excited that you can finally see my friends, William." The light turned on. The light finally allowed me to see what was in the room, and I screamed. The round things were heads, and they were on every shelf, with labels over them. In the middle of the room, there was a pole with flesh on it, and a pole going horizontal across. It was as if the two poles were making out a cross. I screamed and ran up the stairs. I looked back and I could see the Leopard Man running behind me, trying to grab onto my clothes and pull me back down. I ran out through one of the doors and into the forest. I didn't know where to go, so I hid in some bush. I couldn't sleep. I was too scared. And all night long I heard screaming and running. He was trying to get me, and I tried to hold my crying until the morning. I survived the night and eventually made it back to my house early in the morning. My parents didn't know I was out of the house, and frankly, I was too scared to tell them I sneaked out. I told none of my experience, and frankly, I would keep my experience a secret for the rest of my life if it wasn't for a news story. They found the house. Turns out the Leopard Man was some pedophile creep. He liked messing with kids and cutting off their heads, and displaying their heads on shelves as a sick sort of trophy. He was also insane, and stuck all their organs into a cross to worship the one who shall live forever, whatever that means. Overall, I'm scared, but I'm bringing this story to you, so no people have to live through hell like I have. Screw the Leopard Man, and screw whoever was related to him. He can die in hell for all I care. This is my last hope. This is my very last chance that someone, anyone, will see me. Please don't leave me alone. I thought after 8 years, I would have gotten used to it. I thought after 12, I would have gotten used to it. As the years passed, I told myself over and over that this would be the year where I stopped whining. But that day where I finally accepted my fate would never come. How could it? It's hard to come to terms with not existing. So, hi. I'm an 18-year-old girl, and I have no name. Not that it would make much of a difference if I gave myself one. Nobody would ever say it, not in reference to me at least. The most I could do is stand around in some family's home and pretend like one of their names is my own, pretending like I can be enveloped in the solace that they share with one another. The unbreakable bonds I could never form, because for all intents and purposes, I don't exist. It took a while to come to terms with. Not that I've accepted it as permanent just yet, but I understand my predicament now far more than I ever could. I stated it simply before, and I don't mean it with the slightest exaggeration. I don't exist. The world itself denies my existence at every turn. I can't properly communicate just how much I don't want to live like this, though even if I could, it's not like anyone could listen. But I don't have a way out. I tried to put an end to things, but the world didn't let me. The gun suddenly stopped responding to my fingers. The rope untied itself from the ceiling. I'd never been sick either. The world denies my existence, and so does everything living in it. So why wouldn't the smallest, most insignificant organisms do so as well? Viruses aren't exempt from the cold indifference of the world. I've heard people say that before, that the world is cold and uncaring, indifferent to their suffering. And they couldn't be more wrong. The world doesn't deny them their life, doesn't deny them their very existence. It lets them interact with everyone, with everything. If they knew just how good they had it, they would be worshipping the universe for all the attention and care it gave to them. I still wonder how I came to be in the first place. Of course, I wasn't born like any other person. I have no parents to speak of, and if I had been born normally, I doubt I would have ended up like this. The question then becomes, what am I? The first conclusion might be that I'm a ghost, and in a metaphorical sense, sure, but that's far from the truth, since the ghosts can't see me either. I enjoyed living like this for a while. I could take whatever I wanted, live any life I wished, and the universe would bend over backwards to accommodate whatever decision I made. But there was a caveat. I could live any life I wanted, but it would have to be a life of solitude. It didn't matter how much I took, how much I gave, how much I tried to manipulate the world to me at its core. It would simply never allow that to happen. I decided to test it out one day. I walked alongside a man in a grocery store, and I figured that even if he didn't see me, I could get his attention somehow. So, I stuck my leg out to trip him. To my surprise, it worked. I was so ecstatic that I had truly interacted with the world, until he got up, complaining about careless workers. And when I looked down to where I had tripped him, there was a dozen or so soup cans spilled across the floor. I ran to catch up with him and stuck my fist out in front of his face. But it was even more severe this time. The structure of the aisles shifted so that he was still walking in it, but I was several feet away, and nobody bat an eye to them. It had always been like this. To them, there was zero oddity in this new world, because it wasn't new. The universe itself reshifted its structure to avoid acknowledging my impact. I began to suspect that it wasn't just cold indifference. It was hatred. Of course, it would never acknowledge me enough to tell me such a thing, but I believed it nonetheless. It seemed to be going out of its way to spite me personally, to make sure I could never have a place in it. What was so wrong with me then? Was I born wrong? Was I a defect in its eyes? Was my very existence so horrific that it went out of its way to deny every aspect? I didn't want to keep living like this. I couldn't, but I couldn't put a stop to it either. I wasn't allowed to. I made one last desperate attempt. I broke into someone's house. Well, more so slipped in, but that's besides the point. I took a knife from his kitchen drawer and pulled off his blanket when he was sleeping. I took his arm in my grasp and I carved into it. "Look at me." He woke up, looked at his arm, and screamed. He slowly raised his head up, and for a second, his eyes met mine. He wasn't just looking in my direction. He was looking directly at me. And then the world flashed for a moment, and it was gone. The letters I had delicately carved in were replaced with basic vertical slashes. I remembered him yelling at his wife, who was screaming in return, both of them having no idea how the cuts manifested. I remembered looking out the window as he was wheeled away on a stretcher, the world worse off for my involvement. Maybe it did have a point, then. Maybe it was right to forget me, but unfortunately, I couldn't forget myself. I remained firmly locked into my own fate, unable to change a thing besides ruining the lives of those around me. I tried to do nice things too, grabbing stuff from stores and sitting it down by the homeless, cleaning up people's houses for them, but I noticed that those changes would either get erased entirely or turned into something bad. The food would be moldy or poisoned. The cleaning would have caused structural damage to the house. So, I stopped getting involved entirely. Unfortunately, this doesn't have a happy ending. I pulled away entirely, trying not to let my presence make the world a worse place. I figured that maybe if I isolated myself enough, the world would reward me for my understanding by letting me die. That was naive. I remained uncaring to my suffering, unable or unwilling to grant me the slightest relief. But I had long since stopped aging, so I simply sat around. I couldn't possibly describe how mind-numbingly boring the passing of time was. I sat around for thousands, millions, billions. An indescribable number of years passed me by. Each life I saw insignificant, and every planet that died barely able to make me raise an eyebrow. I was almost disappointed that I didn't suffocate when the planet I had spent my early years on finally gave out. I had done my research, and I knew the end of the universe was approaching as well, and I eagerly awaited it at every moment. Perhaps then there would be an afterlife that I could partake in. But the afterlife was only for people, though. As far as the universe was concerned, I didn't count as a person. The only upside of this was that I could outlive the concept that had made my life agony. I was honestly looking forward to when everything gave out and I could finally close my eyes and rest. Yet, even when the universe breathed its last breath, I would remain. The universe is an odd thing. I've seen so much in my practically infinite lifetime, yet never had anyone to share it with. The universe went through a whole cycle. I don't really know how to explain it, but it seems like we're on a loop, destined to repeat every single event that happens. Maybe I'm destined to break that loop. So, I had an idea. The whole world ignores my existence, but I don't think it can ignore this. Every key I push is real, whether or not it wants to believe me. I expected it to shift again to ignore my inputs, but it seems like it forgot about me. Guess my laying low did have a purpose. To be honest, I'm scared. I'm scared that this last idea of mine won't work, that it'll cut me off before I can hit post. I don't want to live in a world where I don't exist anymore. Please, if you see this, talk to me. Acknowledge me. If this post actually gets out there, please don't let me be forgotten. Can you hear me? Thank you for watching, everyone, if you made it this far. It's always fun to narrate these videos and interact with the people who made these stories and such. Did I say videos or stories? It's always fun to narrate these stories. I'm sorry, I get my words jumbled a lot. But if you made it this far, please consider checking out all the authors' original pages. I'll link their Reddits in the description below. and I'll also link their stories, the ones I narrated. Um, and also consider subscribing, maybe, if you're not already. And I hope you have a great day or night. Stay spooky out there, and don't let the monsters bite. Alright, peace out. Here's some bloopers. Have fun. Yeah, I mean, my my brain may be absolutely sauteed right now, so I don't even know. How do I explain this? ADHD is in maximum overdrive. Good Lord, after reading so much, my throat is dry. I guess I'm an opera singer now, and a bad one at that. I always have a lot of fun recording these, because I just get to narrate in any way that I want, and, I could say stupid things in between, and no one would hear them unless I put it in, like, bloopers like this one. So I could be reading one of the lines, and it's like, and when I opened the closet door, that's when I saw him. The grimace. And, like, if if I just left it in, would anyone notice,